All right, I'm going to go ahead and start. My name's Tom Wilhelm. I'm actually not from around here. I'm from Colorado, so I don't know a lot of you guys, and you guys don't know me. So one of the things that I wanted to do in the past was come out here, so I had an opportunity to do so. So here I am. Hi. What I'm going to do, you're going to stare at this screen for a bit because I got some backstory to do. I've been in IT for about 15 years, and I've been in the security component for about half of that. Now, the company I was working for went through a remerger, and about a year and a half ago, I ended up being put in the penetration test team. Penetration? I did. I'll shorten that later because it's a mouthful, and anyway, I don't have a drink up here to... Yeah, no pun intended. So anyway, yeah, you guys can edit that one out later. So I didn't have any real experience with penetration testing. I had done a lot of higher level stuff. I'd also worked in military intelligence, so I had to deal with a lot of managing security information, but not necessarily doing from a pen test point of view. So what happened was, just like anybody else, when they are thrust into a new position, they try to get as much information about what they need to do so they can actually earn their paycheck. And the way I did that was, since there's this huge community of people who hack, I went to the internet and I tried to learn as much as I could. As everybody knows, there's a huge amount of tools available to hack. I mean, you've got everything from Cisco hacks to web hacks, all these tools that allow you to do everything, except for there's not really any good scenarios. And that was the problem I butted up against, was that I needed to learn how to actually hack against something without breaking any laws because I wanted to keep my job. So what I did is I did what a lot of people suggest, and that is set up a lab. Got to set up a lab. So what I did is I wanted something that was a little bit easier since this was kind of new to me. So what I did is I ended up loading up Windows NT. We all know there's a ton of opportunities there. So I loaded up WinNT, and I loaded up a web server, IIS in this case, and I didn't throw any patches on there. Did all the things that a system is supposed to have other than their updates. So stood it up, loaded up Nessus, scanned it. Sure enough, there's a ton of them. Went over to Metasploit, clicked a couple buttons. Next thing I know, I had root. It's like, oh, great. Hey. Sat back and thought about it for a minute, and I realized I learned absolutely nothing. So the reason why is because all I did was click and go. Click, and you get root. So the next thing I did is I needed a little bit more difficult task. So I ended up scanning a more recent version. It was Red Hat in this case, with all the patches and everything like that. So I started trying to hack it. Well, I didn't get anywhere. And the reason why I didn't get anywhere is because there was no exploitable vulnerabilities at that time for that particular version of Red Hat. So basically I was just hitting my head up against a wall. It was too difficult for the skill set that I had, which was minimal for penetration testing. Now, as a result of that, I just said, you know what, labs don't work. There's nothing in between. There's no real good opportunities out there that anybody's put together. So what I had was the advantage of the company that hired me to do the pen testing actually had servers for me to pen test again. So for the next 6 months or so, I just basically tried to drill down as hard as I could, learn as much as I could, as quickly as I could, and go from there. I mean, it was a hard way to do things, but that wasn't the only option that I had. So 6 months later, I sat back and I started thinking about there should be a better way to do this. There shouldn't have to be this huge gap of information that you got to leap across in order to be able to do your job. In my case, actually get a paycheck for. Now, on my certs up here, you can see there's a bunch of them. It's not here to brag. What I want to show you is that there's a lot of Sun stuff in there. So my background was from a system administration side. And it was also from a security component as well. So from that, what I'm about to get into is a direct result of my knowledge of systems. So I'm just going to start over again as to why it's a good thing to have a lab. Now, I know I just said labs don't work. They don't. But it's still important to understand that you can't just go out and start hacking the internet. There's two people up here who have been seriously fined, and they may not be the best examples of people who did things without malicious intent. But the fact of the matter is there are other stories where other people have had full investigations done and they've had to hire lawyers. Even if you are not guilty of doing anything wrong, it doesn't matter. The cost to clear your name is ridiculous. And if you're actually found guilty, these kind of things can ruin your life. So it's really important that when you're trying to develop a skill set, you need to do it legally. Especially if you really don't know what you're doing to begin with, chances are you're going to increase your chances of actually getting caught. Now, also, there's some additional problems with pen testing over the internet. One is we got bandwidth problems. There's a lot of tools that you use include like brute force attacks, crunch up a lot of bandwidth. There's potentials for denial of service attacks. You've got a list here. There's also other things that once you start probing over the internet and hitting some of these servers that are in the back end, maybe through into a DMZ or something like that, there's still IDS systems out there trying to track what's going on. So when you're doing these brute force attacks, they'll shut you down. Or they'll start logging the information, and next thing you know, you get a knock on the door. Now, another thing is that ISPs have actually shut people down because of too much volume. It doesn't matter what they're doing, it's just too much volume. You're not qualified to have what we actually offered you, so even though you're paying for it, we're still going to yank it. So the problem is that those tools can get you in trouble even at a lower level than getting hauled in by the FBI. Another thing is there's time constraints. The internet's huge. What a lot of people do when they focus on, I want to learn how to do some web stuff, they'll focus on a particular exploit. So then they got to start scanning the internet for those particular exploits. Then they'll find the server, but even that takes some time. If you have a lab, it's there, it's ready to go full time. You don't have to even worry about an internet connection. So then there's been other scenarios where people say, well, I'll set up a server and I'll set up some exploits and you do the same thing and then we'll try to hack each other's box. Well, there's some problems with that, is that sometimes your friend doesn't even know more than you do when it comes to setting up a good scenario. And then, of course, they're off at work or school and their system goes down and you can't access it, and or they're on weekend. So it's a mess. I've tried that before and it just doesn't really work. And then also, once somebody else finds out that you're doing this kind of a thing, they want to denial of service you. It's kind of strange. So then, really, the question comes down to, so what? You're not learning real-world scenarios. You're just basically hacking against something that somebody else thought would be a good idea to set up. Another problem about hacking over the internet is code of ethics. I've got a couple certs that if I am busted for anything, they're gone. And if they're gone, my employer's not going to be happy because that's one of the things that I have to maintain. So I want to keep the job, so I got to keep it ethical. Now, there's some disadvantages. Besides what I mentioned earlier about they don't really work. We'll fix that, though. They're expensive and expansive. The more systems you need, you can do a simple internal pen test where it's just you, a router, and another box. But what if you want to actually go through firewalls? What if you want to deal with trying to jump from a DMZ internally? Those kind of scenarios, you need extra equipment, and you need to have them configured right. So next thing you know, you end up like me, where my lab is in my bedroom, and I've got 9 systems, 4 monitors, lots of routers, switches, all sorts of stuff. And my wife's not really happy because it's about 30 to 40 degrees hotter in there than any other room in the house. So what's that? Yeah, that's the other thing too. And the lights, you got to start figuring out how to disconnect those lights because for some reason systems like to have lights on at all time. It's crazy. So anyway, it becomes a bit of an issue as far as trying to cram everything and make it work in a way that is convenient for you and your significant other or roommates. You note everybody has the opportunity if they're trying to get into this to go down and I have my work laptop and I can do jumps to our servers that we use to do our other jumps and do exploits and things like that. But not everybody has that opportunity. So you got to end up pulling it in. And so it becomes difficult. And then let's say you want to actually learn how to hack routers. I mean, you've got to go pick up that particular router. I mean, it's a Cisco router. Are you doing firewalls? You got to get a PICs, things like that. So the diversity really becomes up to you. That's one of the disadvantages of having a lab. There's PICs firewalls out there on the internet, not in your home. So it's easier just to say, well, I'm going to try to hack those, and then instead of spending the money to get one for myself. So that's the disadvantage. The really big problem is how do you make a real-world scenario? If you're going to set up a lab, and it's just you, what are you going to do? You're going to set up a box that you know the solution to. There's no way you can surprise yourself. It's like playing chess with yourself. How are you going to win? You always win. That's the problem. You shouldn't be able to get it right away. And so you have to rely on other people to put together scenarios that challenge you. Another disadvantage. So like I said, about 6 months after I started, I began to think, how can I make this a little bit easier and kind of expand this so others can not have to jump the same hurdle that I did? Well, I thought that whatever it was, it needed to be easy, and it had to be a challenge for people with different skill sets. I also had to obviously simulate real-world scenarios, fairly decent as far as ease of creation. And the portability would really be good, too. I mean, if you're going to have to set up a lab in your house, it's not easy to have friends come over and, hey, I want you to try this. So if it could be portable, that would be great. Well, at that time, I had already known about live CDs, but I had discounted them. The reason why I discounted them is because there's a variety of different types of live CDs. There's distros to Linux, and other operating systems, BSD, stuff like that. There's Backtrack. There's suggestions to make game servers. There's some suggestions to use them as media servers. What I did when any live CD that I actually kind of liked, and Backtrack was a good one, a good example, is I took it, and it's like, yeah, that's pretty cool. I'll just put it on my hard drive and then throw the disk away. I mean, I don't need it anymore. So the actual concept of a live CD being quick to throw in and out and things like that, no, it's not worth it to me. I'll just, just hook up Lilo. If I want it, I'll just carve out different parts on my hard drive and throw whatever live CDs onto the hard drive. So they were kind of a cool thing, but not really useful. Now, when I started thinking about it, the CDs, live CDs, came back to me. It's like one of the problems that we encountered in the group was that I was on was that if we ended up setting up any servers to do things, and there was a couple that we used, Foundstone, for example. You set up a server, a lot of people know this, you set up a server, you start screwing around, you break something, you may have to reload the server. And that's a pain. It takes too long. It just really cuts into your ability to start over and keep going with the flow. So that's why I said, it makes perfect sense to go ahead and use live CDs for this concept of mine. There's some additional advantages. There's less equipment needed. When I say that, a lot of times what people will do is they'll say, okay, I need to set up a a server, and it's going to have 3 different types of Linux on there, and it's going to have Windows on there, and it's going to have BSD, and it's going to have all this other stuff. With a live CD, it's just a CD, a few cents on the dollar. You don't have to have hard drives set up, and you don't have to have the time involved to actually set this box up with multiple disks. Another advantage is it's obviously portable and compact. We talked about being able to take it anywhere with you. You can. And the biggest advantage is that these live CDs, when you do the distro, it's actually a working system. It's got, with a lot of these live CDs, you can drop in, the whole, like the LAMP thing. You can have Linux on there with Apache and MS, MySQL on there, PHP. It's a full functional server. You want mail servers, you can set up these disks to actually have all of that on there. So it's totally functional, whatever scenario you want. And they've got versions of all the different versions of the software that you're looking for. You want a different version of Apache or things like that. They have them. You can drop them onto the disk, and it's good to go. There's some disadvantages. You got to know what you want to do. If you want to learn how to set up systems, a live CD is bad because all you're going to do is reboot the system, and you're not going to learn anything. So if you're into it for the pen testing perspective, you don't care about the setting up of the server over and over again. Like with Boundstone, you had to set up all those like .NET and the IIS and all that other stuff. You don't care sometimes about doing that. You just want the scenario. So if you're going to learn the sysadmin stuff, stick with the box. If you're going to want to do the pen test stuff, try to get rid of some of that overhead. Now another disadvantage is that live CDs typically work off of modules. They're set up in a way that it's easily to drop onto the live CD. Now there's some other ways. The problem is that there's not modules for every bit of software out there. Now there are programs out there that will convert packages into these modules, and you can use those. I've had some success with them. Sometimes I've just had to drop the application on there and run the installer as it boots up. Depends on the scenario. So there's some disadvantage. And the other thing is that you cannot make a live CD and distribute with proprietary operating systems like Microsoft. You can't do that. There are people who have tried to get around some of that using, the ability to test and things like that. Some of this, I'm not a lawyer, and it just seems like it's a bad idea to even try to do something like that. And there's also another OS out there that mimics, or it's actually has the same functionality of XP, I believe, but it's not actually Windows. They've taken the idea behind the kernels and then written their own programs. So when you're actually hacking that, you're not actually hacking a Windows box. So the fact of the matter is that these live CDs intended for distribution will not be able to use operating systems that are proprietary and have licenses that prohibit that. So I decided I'm going to go ahead and run with this. I wanted to make a live CD pen test lab. So I decided I needed some standards. I decided to go with Slacks. And the reason why I went with Slacks is because I was already comfortable with Backtrack. And being a Solaris guy, Slackware actually had a lot more feel of what a Solaris box is like than like Ubuntu. And I think it's just mostly because of GUI and stuff like that. But it's just, it's something that's ingrained and it's hard to break, bad habit to break. So I also needed to know what particular platform. I didn't want to have to create my own pen test platform. So I went with Backtrack, and it only made sense. Somebody put together something, works great. I don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. So I said, whatever I do as far as creating scenarios, I'm going to use Backtrack as a foundation. I needed a hardware router. I wanted to mimic a little bit of an actual network, and the router will provide DNS service and DHCP. Backtrack likes DHCP. I didn't want to have to make you guys try to reconfigure that. And then obviously you need 2 machines. Eventually there's going to be some wireless pen testing live CDs, so you'll need additional systems at that point. but trying to keep it minimal, you need at least 2 high-speed systems like we got here. Some additional standards. This is something I kind of chewed on for a while. I had a problem. I wanted the live CDs also to be DHCP, but I realized that down the road I would need to have set IP addresses if I was going to do any sort of communication between a client and a server, try to do man-in-the-middle attacks and things like that. So I decided I was just going to create the disks with fixed IP addresses. And I went with kind of a scenario. I figured that level 1 disks will be, as you can see here, in the .1 dot whatever, and then the level 2s, that's how you can distinguish what disk level you're at. We'll get into levels here in a second. I also, this is something I expanded on. I'm expanding this topic. Originally I had said that I preferred that people would use OSS TMM as a methodology to learn how to pen test or to do these disks. Well, I'll get into that a little bit more, but I decided to back away from OSS TMM and suggest people use the ISSAF. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Some disadvantages. The disks do not necessarily eliminate your need for equipment. If you want to have a PIX firewall, you still got to have a PIX firewall. If you're going to be doing any sort of network penetration testing, you're going to have those components in there. In addition, you also still have to understand some basic routing protocols and understand how to set up a network and things like that. It's not extremely difficult, but later on in some of the more advanced scenarios, there will definitely be a need to understand exactly how DMZ should be set up. I'll try to obviously set that up as clear as possible, but there'll still be some need for an understanding of how that works. And then also, since you're using Backtrack, and a lot of the tools that you're going to use are going to be a command line, you need to understand some basic Unix commands. So let's talk a little bit about Slacks. Slacks has, as you can see, they got thousands of modules, like I mentioned before. They have different combinations of, like if you just want Apache, you can get an Apache module. If you want Apache and PHP, you can do that. There's different combinations. They also have some pre-built ISOs. It's also released under GNU, and like I said, since it has a bit of a feel towards what a Solaris system might feel like, it's not necessarily user-friendly. Sorry, it's a little bit more. They expect you to know how to do system administration stuff before you actually do anything. So, if you don't like Slackware, they have there's a linux-live.org. It's the same guy who sets up Slacks, which is the live CD version, compressed version of Slackware. He actually set up some scripts that you can use to turn other versions of Linux into a live CD. And I think they even had some Windows stuff as well. Now, when I started actually putting together the live CD, this is how you're not supposed to do it. And I'll get into it a little bit. The file structure is typical of a normal Unix system. It's got what you see there. Now, most people will notice that there are a couple extra directories. One's modules and one's root copy. Root copy is what I'm going to talk about. Root copy was intended early on by Slacks, the maker of Slacks. He put that in there, and he put that in there for people who were developing on Windows. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to load up your version of Slacks. You're supposed to make modifications to your operating system, and then there are tools that will convert that into modules. And then you take that module and you drop it into a new version of your live CD. And that way it's there without having to deal with any of the other permissions problems that developing off of Windows presents. There's some serious ones. I used root copy intentionally, even though I wasn't supposed to. I developed it predominantly on Unix anyway. I still port it into that root copy directory. And the reason why I do that is because if you get my disks and you drop it into your CD, not booting off of it, you can actually go into that directory and see everything that I did. And the reason why that's important is because under root copy you'll see additional directories It's blank to begin with, but you can drop these in there. For example, Etsy password files, Etsy shadow files. If you want the people testing your live CDs to use the same login root Tor that the live CDs use, you don't have to do anything. If you wanted to make it a challenge where they actually have to try to hack the passwords, you have to change the password file and the shadow file. I wanted people to see what I did and how it's designed so they could do it themselves. If you want sudoers added, you add it. If you want to do some RCLocal is basically it's a startup script that it's just an rc.d file, but you can basically write it in any shell that you want to. But the RC.local file can take additional things that you may not think of originally. For example, here I've got a snippet from one of the disks, and it uses IP tables. Now, that's an interesting concept. I mean, you have a lot of flexibility that you can drop into these disks that are outside of the normal way of doing things as far as modules. And so allowing people to see the disk, like I said, will allow them to make their own. In addition, hopefully it gives them additional ideas. Plus, if they really get stuck and they want to see what I did, it's there. They can see it. It's not encrypted. It's just open file. So I mentioned earlier there's levels. I mentioned earlier than that these disks should be designed for people with different skill sets. These are some of the ideas that I had for what should show up at different levels. I didn't really know where level 4 should be. It's kind of one of those things that we'll see what happens. If somebody can put together something that is totally obscure, then it should probably be in level 4, and I'd like to see something like that. But so once you understand what level you might want to be designing a disk for, and in my case, I started off with the level 1s. I've got 2 level 1s out there right now. I'm working on a level 2. So once you decide on what level you want to run a disk at, you start thinking about what are some of the exploits or the compromises that you can include into these things. Now, this list is actually from personal experience working at the job I am at. So some of that might surprise you, some of it might not. Now, there's also some additional ideas to use that you can get from like the OSS TMM methodology or ISSAF. Plus, there's also personal experience that a lot of you guys will have as well that you could use to drop into these disks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the basic disks, disk 1.100. This is what the physical layout is. We've got 2 systems, and there's a router in between. And the IPs are going to be assigned. The backtrack obtains it through DHCP, and then my disk that I wrote is 1.100, and it is fixed. And the scenario, you got to have a scenario. You can't just necessarily just drop in the box and say, okay, go. The scenario in this case is that there's a CEO of a company that's been pressured by the board of directors to do a pen test analysis of their entire company. Well, he doesn't like to spend money. He believes that his admins are good. So what he does is he says, okay, I'm going to give you 5 days, and you got to figure out if these guys are doing their job. Oh, and by the way, I'm only going to give you 1 box to actually attack. So that's your scenario, and that's your box. Now, on the disk itself, you're going to find out that there is a Apache web server, and on that web server is going to have the license to use this. It's published under GNU also, and it's also going to have web pages that detail or that are pertinent to this particular scenario. There's also a hints page. You can't necessarily just stumble on the hints. They're actually white text on white background, so you have to actually want to know what the next step might be. And it's got a list of tools, and it's also got a list of some hints that might help you move on through. Now, the real objective, not the scenario I gave you, the real objective is to learn how to actually do pen testing. It's not necessarily to get to the end and figure out how this works. It's to actually go through the process of learning how to pen test. This is one of the things that it would have been really helpful for me to know, is if they had laid something out like this where I had the opportunity not to just rush through it, but to actually try to understand it. And that's where the methodologies will come in place, and I'll talk about that later, like I said. Now, in this particular case, this particular disk, and for those who haven't done it yet, you might want to start tuning me out. There's some tools that are required. There's a list there. Tools that are not required. I did not want people to just have to punch buttons and get root access. So luckily, the latest version Backtrack, I believe it was for legal reasons, did not include Nessus. I thought that was actually a good thing because, like I mentioned before, it's easier just to load it up and run it against the system and see if there's any vulnerabilities. If it's not on the Backtrack, I designed the scenarios to not include the need to have Nessus. And then Metasploit, like I said, it's just a click and root thing. Now, if you actually ran a Nessus scan against these disks, you'll find that these disks do not have vulnerabilities, or at least the time that I printed these. I didn't go and pull out vulnerable versions of the different softwares to let you guys practice against. I actually wanted solid versions of applications where there are no vulnerabilities. So you have to figure out how to get in through, like that list that I mentioned before. There has to be something else. It's just too easy to have an exploitable vulnerability and go. It doesn't make any sense. Now later on, you may need to craft your own exploits. I can see that happening. But you won't find them up on a Nessus scan. You won't find them with an exploit in Metasploit. So first thing you're going to do is you end up running an Nmap scan against the system. And you see that there's a whole bunch of services available to the system. The target itself actually does not reply to ping. That's actually screwed up a lot of people, but that's a good security tool or method of trying to hide your system a little bit, because people who do run simple scans against them tend to just do pings to see if, whole block of IP addresses, let's see what systems are out there, we're just going to do a simple ping. And that's one method that a lot of system administrators actually use. So when you actually come across something that doesn't make sense, it's like, well, it doesn't respond to pings. Well, that was intentional. Also, you're going to find out that in this particular case, FTP is intentionally broken. It says it's got an FTP server. What I did is, in this particular scenario, if you dig deep enough, you're going to find out that this server used to be an FTP server. Well, what a lot of system administrators do when they don't really think about security is they just disable a function. They don't want to have to necessarily rebuild a box so they can just throw up in a web server. They just disable it. They figure maybe I'll need it again later and I'll just reconfigure it. And people have actually turned it back on. It's kind of cool, but in this particular scenario, the idea is that this is a dirty box, and there's some systems on there that may not help you in your analysis in trying to actually do your penetration test, just like a real-world scenario. So what you'll do eventually is you'll end up going to the web page on this particular disk, and you'll find out that there are a list of admins. And in this case, there's 3 admins, and there's a list here. So what people will do is that they realize, okay, well, if that's all I got to go against, then I need to start doing some brute force attack. Remember, this is a level 1. It's an attempt to get people familiar with some of the more basic tools that are used out there. Brute force eventually will not be successful. Some of that IP table stuff probably gave you guys a hint. But basically what you need to do in this particular scenario is you've got to brute force your way in there. You've got some additional services. There was a mail server. There was SSH, so let's try it. Well, one thing most people will notice who's been doing this is that there's an intern. So interns typically are straight out of college or almost done with college, but there's not a whole lot of development not a lot of the program is out there for showing these new guys how to actually be secure in their system. It's just, here's some Unix and here's some network stuff. So the interns typically don't really know a whole lot about security. So in this case, you could actually try to target that individual Or you could target all of them. And if you want to target all of them, you need to at least expand your mind a little bit and just assume that Adams A in this case and Banter B and Coffee C may or may not be the actual login name. So you need to expand that. And in this case, it shows the different combinations that you might want to try. You actually run Hydra, which is the case I used in this particular scenario. There's also some other scanners on there that will do brute force as well, but I particularly like Hydra. And in this case, you'll find out if you actually just targeted the intern and you tried all the possible combinations, you're going to find out that he uses a Joe password of bbanter, bbanter. You'll notice that there's some additional flags, and that's the other thing that these disks will do is that you try to run it under normal, I'm just going to write Hydra, or run Hydra with this login name against this dictionary attack. Well, it won't necessarily work that easily because you really need to be more familiar with the actual tools because there are some cases, normal dictionary attack against a Joe password, in this case where the password equals the same thing as the login, will not work until you put on these flags. So the simple things, some people will absolutely step over and not do. So these disks kind of push you to understand a little bit more about the actual tools themselves. Makes you actually read them, the help file. So now we know that it's not Banter B as it was in the email. It's actually bbanter. So now we know what we can run against with the other names, the other admins. Oh, that one other thing is if you actually try to go into the system with bbanter, he may be an idiot when it comes to security, but the actual main administrator is not. He limited Banter to basically do nothing except for modify HTML files. That's it. So you go exploring with this password, it's like, yeah, I got it. You get in there and you'll find out, well, that didn't really do much for me. So you got to go back and you got to get the rest of the password. Well, turns out you get another password by doing a complete dictionary attack. Take a little bit longer. In this case, A. Adams has a password for Nostradamus. You go back into the system. I'm not going to tell you the rest. But basically, you're going to end up using some additional tools like John the Ripper and OpenSSL, and you will have to figure out how to elevate your privileges and things like that. So it's not a complete ruin of the disk, but it at least gets you guys going in the beginning. To really know if you finish the disk, I'd like to throw in little surprises. And in this case, if this particular disk, if you can tell me the CEO's bank account information, you win. So, because, I mean, if you got the Adams password, a lot of times in a business world, that's enough. You don't have to go any farther. They're good. They'll be happy. You can fill out your report, send it in, and then they'll basically tell these people you need to clean up your ad. So what else can we do with these disks? Now, eventually, like I mentioned before, I plan on doing some wireless pen testing. Most people think, okay, well, what could that be? Well, you're going to crack the web key? No. Yeah, sure, that's fine. But there's also some additional things that you could do, too. Like mimic the MAC address. If you have an access point that has a restriction on what it's going to accept as far as MAC addresses, you may need to do a little bit more work than just crack a web key. Those are the kind of things, man-in-the-middle attack, those are the kind of things that I'd like to see employed. Obviously, the web would be like a level 1. Some of the man-in-the-middle attacks will definitely be like a level 3. IDS and IPS. How many people actually target those systems? Those systems actually do have vulnerabilities. I would like to incorporate some of the live CDs to include IDS and IPS attacks against those. Also attacks against log servers. That would be cool too. Attack against signature files. That I can talk about that offline because that can kind of get a little crazy. But so let me talk about what are some other things. Another good thing is forensics lab. I could see this definitely being something used by people who are interested in learning forensics. You don't want to go out and try to learn forensics by actually working on systems that you're supposed to be examining. You're going to tamper the evidence. It's going to be ruined. You've got to learn somewhere. There needs to be some sort of easy progression into that kind of job field. Another one is classes. A lot of opportunities exist to use these disks in a classroom environment to teach people different things. And another thing is that when I was out looking at all these neat tools, there was, like I said, a bunch of them, really cool stuff. Well, the problem was that it's like, okay, I want to learn how to use this tool. Well, I have nothing to target. Some of these tools are very specific in what they target, a particular database, a particular, Anyway, they are too particular that it's difficult to find a system to actually practice against. It would be really neat if somebody put out a tool with a companion live CD that they could plug and run and people could actually practice against. That's just one of the little thoughts that I had as I was trying to figure out what all the tools use. So one of the things I mentioned earlier was OSS TMM versus ISSAF. One of the things that I get a lot of comments on is, what do I do? I don't know what to do. How do I do this? They really are brand new to even Unix, but they want to know what to do. So I point them, I say, well, go check out OSS TMM. There's some really good information there, and that will help you at least start guiding your way down the path of learning how to pen test. Well, it turns out nobody uses it. The question is why? Why? Is it not useful? Is it because people think that by using a methodology that they don't actually, it's like a kick to their ego? I don't know how to do this, so I have to rely on something else? Or is it, I know what I'm doing and, leave me alone? Or is it just that they suck? They don't really teach anybody anything. Now, there are some obvious advantages to using a methodology, and the methodology, for anybody if anybody's been in the military definitely has a regimen on what you do, and you train to that. There's a set pattern on how you do things. And the reason why they do that is so you don't skip anything, you don't forget anything, you don't mess up. And with methodologies, what it does is it says, have you looked at this? Have you looked at that? What about, have you done just a straight SYN attack, or have you actually done some, like timing attacks? Have you done that? And you can, oh, wow, I didn't think about that. Make sure that you're not forgetting anything. And that one little step might actually be enough to crack the whole thing open. So let me talk a little bit about the difference. And I forgot the acronyms. You'll have to forgive me. It's the same thing. You use the acronym so often that sometimes you forget what they actually mean. It's like open source security test methodology module or something like that. Anyway, I totally ruined it. Anyway, OSS TMM is, right now, seems to be the more favorite methodology. And the methodology is, it's at a higher level. And I think that's actually one of the problems that I encountered originally with telling people to go OSS TMM. If they've never done this before, and it tells them, you need to check these kind of things, they're not going to know what tools to use or what even command line they should use. So the ISSAF is actually easier to use, but it's out of date. And the reason why it's out of date is because it actually gave you command lines to use. Well, there's newer tools out there that do better jobs, and sometimes the ISSAF does not cover all the potential ways of using a tool. All I really want you to pay attention to is the bottom half. This is an excerpt from the ISSAF. They give you an example of an Nmap scan, and basically it's a stealth scan of a particular IP address. And it's just, give me all the verbiage that you can. That's what the -VV stands for. So it does it goes off and launches a scan. That's what the ISSAF tells you to do a stealth scan. Now, let's talk about the OSS TMM. They give you a little bit broader. So this is what what a port scan is. This is what you're supposed to get out of it. Here's some other things you do. Oh, and by the way, you got to enumerate the port using a TCP SYN attack. Okay, what does that mean? Most people won't know, just getting into this thing, what that even means. So the OSS TMM seems to be a larger barrier, again, to jump into. And so I have backed off of suggesting using OSS TMM and suggest using the ISSAF. Now, why do you care about using a methodology? Like I said before, make sure that you cover all the things. Yes, you can finish the disks. without using a methodology. Everybody seems to have done that. But what is the real goal of these disks? Is it to just get to the end, or is it actually learn how to do pen testing? Like I said, there's so many different parts to a pen test that talks about in these different modules that you would be skipping over, and you won't have the opportunity to relearn this using these disks again because you already know what the answer is. Because if you've completed it going through without using a methodology, yes, you can come back and try it again, but you know what you're going to find, and you may not want to necessarily repeat those steps. So you lose an opportunity if you don't start off using a methodology. Now, if you guys just want to jump into it, take the 1.100 disk and get a feel for it, and then the second disk, go ahead and use a methodology. It's fine. But the idea behind these disks is to bridge that gap, to make it easier to get into this whole thing. Now, here's my personal plea for action. I want you guys to think about what I've just presented up here. It's an opportunity to allow others to not have to jump that big hurdle in the pen test. I'm particularly biased towards certain scenarios. It's just everybody has a particular preference on things that they like to mess with. I don't like messing with databases. The second one will be a database, but it probably won't be as good as something else somebody else could have put together. So there's also a lot of different facets. There's the web attacks. There's application attacks. There's all these different ways to do penetration testing. And I have a particular favorite as well. Some other people on my team have other ones. Some guys like doing the web, some guys like doing the network stuff. It varies. So everybody's going to have a different approach to this. And like I said, I just started about 1.5 years ago, and I've crammed as much in as I can. But there's people that have been doing this for years that have a lot more of a grip on what to do and what some potential real-world scenarios are. And my plea for action is for those of you that have that skill, even if it's just a beginner, you cracked something on a web page. Hey, I'd like to replicate that. Put that on a disk. If you're somebody that's very successful doing NOP sleds and stuff like that, and you want to put together a scenario using that technique in order to exploit an application, I'd love to see that. I'm not going to be able to crank those out. Not at least right now. So, like I said, it doesn't matter if you're a newcomer to this or you're an expert. My request is that you guys try to give this an opportunity. Put together a disk. Give us an opportunity for other people to learn. And like I said before, if I put together a disk, I know the solution. I would like to be able to try some of these disks. And if anybody can put together a disk, I would like that. I'd like to be able to try it. I'd like to be able to test it. I know the solutions. I know all the little peculiarities. I know passwords that you can't hack and what they are. That's no fun to me. So I would like the opportunity to try these as well. And that's basically a conclusion of my speech. Hope I'm doing okay on time. It's not too bad. The CDs are available download. I've made them available for free. Like I said, they're under the new public license. So you can go get them off of d-ice.net. And I have an email address up here that you guys are more than welcome to contact me. I love to talk to people. I love to talk to people about security. Just drop me a line and say, hi, I went there and your speech sucked. Or, hey, I went there and I tried it and I couldn't figure it out. Just anything. Just go ahead and please contact me. And at that point, that's all I have. And I really appreciate everybody for being here. And it's been an honor to be able to speak at Phreaknic. So does anybody have any questions at this point? Yes. I've heard of it. Yeah. Bartpe is actually, if I remember right, Bartpe is not it doesn't put together a live CD. It is that's the group of people that have put together a alternative operating system. Oh, it is? Okay, great. Yeah, you can, but the problem is distribution again. There is a license restriction.
Now, there's somebody who does this. They to attack CD and click here, and it will build something. I'm trying to figure the name of that ultimate boot CD. Basically, it's supposed to be built and has a bunch of CDs already, much stuff already comes with it. Oh, no problem.
Okay, so yes, you can do live CDs of Windows. Absolutely. And you can put scenarios together using live CDs of Windows. There's no doubt. Question is, can you distribute them? I don't want to go down that route. Yes, sir. You had a question.
You said when you were talking about your disk one, but I think it's a great idea. And I heard about this last time. You said that you win if you obtain the CEO's bank information. You said that was a hint. So when you start the test, the going in disk one, do you know what your objective is?
No. The question was, do you know what your objective is when you start these live CDs? The live CDs, you get the scenario, and that's it. On the other disk as well, there's something else that you need to find. I'm not going to tell you what that is, and you need to figure that out. And that's the cool part, is that how far do you dig down into a live CD, into any scenario? How far do you do that? That's a tough call to make. In a lot of cases, if we know that a system is exploitable, this is in the real world, we know it's exploitable, we have to make a value call. If it's seen by everybody in the world, the system needs to get fixed right now. If it's something that nobody sees except for a very small handful, we may do some more exploration. So this is a difficult thing to decide. How far do you dig down? Now, some people will be happy just to get root. That's an exploit. You successfully own the box. You should be happy if that's all you get. I mean, that's really good. If you can get more, that's even cooler. The real question is, how far do you go down? So to answer your question, no, you don't know under normal circumstances that the CEO's bank account is in there. I just like to throw in extra little things so it's like, wow, hey, check that out. Now I know, And then, of course, people are going to see if it's a valid account. It's not a valid account. It's not my account. So, yes, please. I'm sorry. I have a bit of hearing problem. When I was in the Army, I was too close to generators for too long, so I wasn't able to hear the question. Could you either speak? Right. The root password, which CD was this? Was it the 1.100 or 1.110? All right. You may not need that. Do you always need that? I don't know. Right. If you remember back in the previous slide, I know that people were going to try Tor. That was just a given. So I had to reconfigure the shadow file and the password file to use different passwords for root. So that might be a continuation. That might be something that you don't need. Maybe you just need elevated privileges. That's just the best hint I can give you. I don't want to ruin it for anybody. So, yes, please. Right. That I didn't include this in the slide, but that's something that I would like to do. I would like to be able to have all of my whatever disks on one virtual server communicating with each other. And when I do the man-in-the-middle attack, I would like to be able to do that in a virtual environment where you can configure the systems in such a way that you are hacking that. Now, there has been an individual who has put together a step-by-step process to load these up in VMware. And I've had suggestions to use, escaped my mind, but there's some other virtual software out there that's easier to use, and that would be something that I would like to do. The bigger it is, the more I'd like to get it moved into a virtual world. I use the router primarily because it gives a solid foundation of what a physical network might be like, and it gives you a little bit of a feel for what a real lab might be like. Now, in a virtual world, there is differences. You can't just necessarily log into a router and go and fix it. You got to actually configure the virtual machine to be able to handle those different nets. So I would love to do that, and I plan on doing that. I would love to cram as much of that in there. And if somebody actually is really keen on something like that and would like to put something together, I would love to see that. We actually have that. I believe the individual already posted something like that, but he posted it for in a Linux environment, not for a Windows environment. I actually do most of my development and testing in a VM system, but I don't want to go in, my personal self do not want to go into supporting VM discussions. I would rather support and focus my time on supporting the disks.
I always talk about this reason, I'm sure much of you already heard of it. It's something called WebGo. It's deliberately insecurely designed web application so people can test out things like SQL injection, other common cross-site descriptions and other common web vulnerabilities.
There is another system or another distribution, a Linux distribution called Damn Vulnerable Linux. And it's the same scenarios that they put together applications that have intentional vulnerabilities. I mean, my original thought was to go down that route, but it comes back to the same problem. How are you going to exploit that? If you know there's a vulnerability on an application, you're going to load up Nessus, you're going to look for an exploit in Metasploit, and you're going to go. It doesn't give you a real-world scenario. It gives you a point-click root scenario. It's not nearly as fun. So, any other questions, please? We have one over here. It's never secure. The question was, when do you know a system is secure based on how much time you spend? It's never secure. Somebody else, there are 0 days out there. We talk about 0 days, and there's a lot of 0 days out there that people are using that don't hit the radar, and they probably will never hit the radar. People like to keep them quiet. There's always a level of reasonable security. Now, I've heard some people discuss about defense in depth, and there's arguments about that and arguments against that. One of the things that bugs me most is that there is a conflict on what the defense in depth really is supposed to be protecting against. And when people assume that a defense in depth is to prevent people from getting in and hacking things, that's not necessarily what it does. It's just speed bumps. Now, to go back to your question about how do you know when a system is secured, you don't know. It takes constant monitoring. It takes constant research into those things. It's a constant struggle, and that's something that I used to deal with all the time. Now I'm on the other side, waiting for those people to get so swamped with their patches that they forget the one box and allows me to go in and bust them. So it's a tough thing to do. Yes, please. I'm sorry, I caught half of that. Converting packages to modules. That's a tough one. Like I said, time? Okay. If somebody else has any questions, I will be free the rest of the night. Come up and say hi. I don't know anybody, so it would be nice to at least have one or two names that I could actually say, hey, I met at Phreaknic. But feel free to ask me any questions. Like I said, I love to talk. I like to talk about security. I also like to get any sort of feedback, negative or positive. So if you want to ask the question again afterwards, I'd welcome that. If you have any other questions, I am free at the end. And yes, sir. I'm sorry? No, I do not, and I won't. Somebody else might do that. I won't. Okay, thank you very much.